Welcome to KVEC for the IEP for Principals, the Principal Support Network. And we're going to talk to you about understanding the IEP and what that means for principals. My name is Denny Paul May, and this is Dr. Dion Bates that's also joining us. So today, our learning intention is to increase the understanding of the IEP, to look at a little bit at N through F and the IEP, and to understand that the idea has two parts. And that we're going to try our best to create programs that are going to attack both of those parts of the idea and ensure that we have a FAPE for each of our students that are entitled to that FAPE. And then understanding the role of principal or chairperson in the IEP process will be some of our discussion as well. So without further ado, let's get going. Before we begin, I really want to talk to you about two particular Supreme Court cases that kind of drive what we do in IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was the old Public Law 94-142 and the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. But now we just refer to it as IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's really been that since about 1990. There's been two seminal or landmark cases that have come down from the Supreme Court that have looked at really how much benefit a student is going to get from an IEP. And the IEP is the cornerstone of IDEA. The IEP is the focal point of the student's programming, if you will, that's layered on top of all the things they get in core instruction, but also just keeping in mind that these two cases are really the drivers behind what we do. And if you think about Amy Rowley and her situation all the way back in 1982, she was a first grade student up in upstate New York, and she was deaf. But Amy Rowley, in spite of being deaf, had an IQ that measured in the 135 to 140 range. Amy Rowley today is a professor holding a doctoral degree, and she was able to achieve that through her schooling. And when the Supreme Court decided the Amy Rowley case, the disagreement was really between the parents, who were also deaf, and the school system. And at that time, the school system said, "Hey, Amy Rowley's making progress. She's doing well. She's able to move from grade to grade. She is able to receive a benefit from the IEP that was written for her when she was in the first grade to support her inability to hear." And so the parents, though, felt like she could maximize her potential to a greater degree if she were to have an interpreter throughout the entire time that she's in school. And so they asked the school system, they kind of disagreed with the IEP that the school system had presented to them in the meeting as she entered her second grade year. And what they found was that there was a lot of data that supported that Amy herself really didn't want that interpreter. She was smart, and she was doing well, and she had a hearing impairment. She was a tremendous, she had tremendous ability in terms of being able to read lips, and she was able to make progress within their program. And so, long story short, Supreme Court said, "Hey," when they looked at that, the parents appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. They said, well, let's look at what is required of the school district to provide a FAPE. And so it really hinged on, did she need a maximum education? Okay, did she need supports? Did she need that interpreter to make progress? And really to get a benefit more than make progress, but to get a benefit from the program. And they used what the Supreme Court said. They came back and said she didn't need that the interpreter. She was doing just fine. She was matriculating from grade to grade, and that was really the standard they used to decide this case. And so they said, "Hey, Amy Rowley, she's a student that has high IQ. She's doing well. She has supports, and she did have some supports with her IEP, and she had some goals with her IEP, and they were appropriate. And so the Supreme Court said, "Hey, we only have to provide a minimum floor of opportunity for advancement. And if a student is matriculating from grade to grade, then that's enough." And uh, but what people across the nation quickly realized as they were working with students with disabilities was that Amy Rowley was the exception. Amy Rowley, uh, she had a higher IQ. She was able to make progress. And so, what do districts, or what do circuit courts, what do um, public school systems? How do we address all the other students that maybe don't have those types of abilities? And so quickly, there was a split across the nation in terms of how this was interpreted. And so we work within the Sixth uh, Court of Appeals, the Sixth Circuit of Appeals, and there are like 12 of those across the nation. And so in Kentucky, we immediately realized that we needed to do more than a minimum floor of opportunity for advancement for all these students that may have had uh, more diverse needs than what Amy Rowley had, and also some deficiencies that maybe we needed to provide a little something more for them than just a minimum floor of opportunity for advancement. And then when we looked at you know some students were not able to meet the standards. Some students are not able to advance from grade to grade. And so what do we do with those students? And so the appellate courts were really were split. Some took a higher interpretation and provided more for students with disabilities. And then some courts said, "Hey, we're going to stick with this de minimis." And you may have heard, if you've been around the special education for very long, like I have, uh, you may have heard this phrase: "We do not have to provide a Cadillac education to students. We only have to provide a serviceable Chevrolet." And so we applied that, and several of the districts across the nation applied that lower standard. Some applied the higher standard, and here in Kentucky, we applied the higher standard uh, for a great part of the last 35 or 40 years. We've been able to apply that higher standard, and we had some court cases that supported that. One being Deal, uh, uh, which was a case that said that we have to do more. We have to do more, and we have to have reasonable attempts at making progress. And so, 35 years later, we had a case come out of the 10th Circuit, which was in Colorado. And this was the Indrueff case that you may have heard of. And the Indrueff case, it really has an impact on how we develop IEPs. And the Indrueff case was a case that was decided on a student that was at the other end of the spectrum. This was a student that had significant autism. Okay, this student was a student with autism. Okay, and he had significant issues. Um, he was a student that may, when applied a program, may not be able to meet the standards and may need alternate standards. And so when they decided this case, they looked a little deeper into that. And when uh, Andrew's parents decided to sue, what really got it started was the fact that that school system had one, they had the same goals for this student. Like I said, he had autism and he was severe, and uh, they provided the same goals year after year after year. They copied and pasted goals. They didn't make any changes. They didn't have any progress monitoring. They didn't involve the parents in the development of the IEP. And so you could see the big differences here. And then when they got all the way to the the Court of Appeals, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, um, Justice Gorsuch, who is now on the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, he was the appellate judge at that time in Colorado, ironically. And he said, he even added language to this de minimis or minimum floor of opportunity for advancement language and said it's merely more than de minimis is what's required for a student. And so these the appellate courts in Colorado found for the school system that the school system had an IEP that allowed this student to make a little bit of progress. They had adjusted the goals a little bit. They had a behavior intervention plan that was not based on a lot of data, and they didn't have any progress monitoring. And so when Jack Robinson took this case, he said, the number one thing was that there was not any progress monitoring. The school district did not have evidence that they had provided a FAPE. And so it made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And so we had what emerged from that was really a two-part test, and it splits IDEA into two requirements. We have procedural requirements and we have substantive requirements. And so we're going to talk about those as we move on. But that's a little history lesson in terms of how we got to here and how this is impacting what we do in developing IEPs and what principals need to know in terms of what is an appropriate program. And are we meeting the letter of the law in terms of providing a FAPE? And are we actually providing what IDEA says we need to be providing for our students with disabilities in our schools? And so the ruling in the Andrew F. case said basically this: IEPs must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress. Now, under Raleigh, it was a minimum. There was a minimum amount of advancement, and they were using grade to grade advancement as a marker. Under Andrew, it became progress on the IEP goals, appropriate in light of the unique of the child's unique circumstances. And the extra parts here was that you must have challenging goals and objectives, and a student's program must be appropriately ambitious. The essential function of the IEP is to pursue academic and functional advancement. Now, this also says that we need to address functional performance within the IEP. And a few years back, we were a part of a corrective action process that we worked through with the State Department. And one of the things that they said to us was that it's not enough to have academic goals and IEPs. We have to have goals that speak to functional communication, that speak to daily living, executive functioning, that speak to our socialization and how those impact. So when a student, no matter their disability, when a student has an IEP, we have to meet all their needs that emanate from that disability. And so doing appropriate evaluations is certainly a great big need for us in terms of appropriately providing a FAPE. Now, the IEP is a process in which parents and school-based personnel develop and implement an educational program for a student. For a student's success of that program is evaluated, and then a document that is the blueprint of a student's free appropriate public education. It's the cornerstone. It really is what we look at, and it's really a document that if you go to court is going to be scrutinized. And so we want to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing in terms of developing the IEP. So I want you to take just a minute, and I want to do a little brain dump activity with you. I want you guys to think about an IEP, and I want you to think about how you monitor IEPs and how you look at IEPs, and just talk to us about what you think an IEP is supposed to provide for a student. Outlines the student's needs and services. Sylvia McIntosh, that's really good. It outlines the student's needs, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then if you have a need, You have to provide a service, and I think that hits a big part of it. I mean, I really like that answer. I really do, and so that's really great. Thank you for providing that. Let's move on. Uh, so, in going back to what we were talking about, idea has two parts to ensure faith. We have two parts. We have procedural requirements and we have substantive or substantive, however you want to say that word. You hear some folks say substantive, some say substantive. I say substantive. So if you'll just bear with me on that. We're talking about idea, we're talking about FAPE, we're talking about the IEP, and what our role as principals are in terms of just ensuring a free, appropriate public education is provided to our students. Where we are here is we're talking about procedures and substance. We have two requirements when we're providing a FAPE in a school district or in a school. We've got to make sure that we have procedures and we have substance to our programs. And so we're going to kind of explore that just a little bit. So what does that mean? What does procedural mean? What when you think about procedural in terms of IEP provision implementation, what is it that we have to do procedurally in the law? What's in our policies that tell us, we got to do this or we got to do that in order to make sure that this happens and that happens? What are we talking about when we talk about procedures? If you don't care to put that in the chat, I would really love to hear from you and what you think in terms of procedure. What are the procedures that we need to follow in order to ensure that we're providing a FAPE? Sylvia says we have a specific process. The parent has to be involved and we have timelines. Those are procedures. You're exactly right. Those are procedures. What about an ARC notice? Is that procedural? That's it's kind of a checkboxy kind of thing. It's a checklist. We got to have a 7-day notice. We got to make sure that the right people are invited. We have to get the right people to the table. Those are procedural. Okay. But then when you think about IEP, does it include are there procedures with the IEP? What are some of the procedures with the IEP? How would you think about that? Do IEPs have certain things they have to have in them? Do we have something that guides us? We have an IEP guidance document from KDE. That's kind of our how-to. That's kind of our instructional manual on how we write IEPs. So what about we got to do the evaluation. That's exactly right. And but you also have like some components, right? So some components of the IEP. So when we look at the components of the IEP, we're looking at certain things have to be in the IEP, and those are somewhat procedural. And this is a little bit confusing because you say, well, then what's the substance? Okay, and we're going to get to that. I promise. All right. Hopefully, if I don't run out of time and get too wordy here, but really, when you think about it, the IEP requires that we have present levels of academic and functional needs addressed. Okay, and we already said that it's not enough just to do academics. We have to look at the whole child. We have to look at if there are deficits in that evaluation that arise, no matter the disability, we have to address it with either a need or a service. And so you also have measurable annual goals that need to be in there and objectives that need to be in there based on our policies. How students' progress will be measured. How are we going to report on progress to parents? That's required by law. And this is kind of an overview, kind of a federal kind of look at it. Services to be provided based in peer-reviewed research. How long is the service going to last? What's the duration and the frequency and the intensity, and those types of things. And we have a statement of LRE, and we have an ESY services that we have to extended school year services that we have to consider. We have assessment participation where we decide on how many accommodations or what accommodations the student's going to get. And then we have to make a statement about how much the student is going to be pulled away from the general education environment. And so those are all components of the IEP, but they're also procedural. We got to have those in there. And if we don't, we're in danger of making a procedural error. Now, let's get to the substantive requirements of the idea. And I just wanted to throw this in here really quickly. When we talk about the substance of the requirements of the idea, we're talking about the school district's obligation to provide a FAPE that's designed to lead to student progress. So when we talk about that Andrew case, and we changed from some meaningful entitlement or some meaningful benefit, the language really changed when Andrew came about in 2017. It changed from some benefit to progress. We've got to ensure progress. And there's ways that we go about that with the IEP. And the substantive requirement represents the what of the idea. If a student's IEP is reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of their unique circumstances. Now, what does that mean? Would someone like to take a shot at what you think that means? I mean, that's kind of some lawyer speak there, right? Let's go back. Reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of his circumstances. Now, we know that we have school going on, right? We know that we have procedure. I mean, we know that we have standards. We know that we have a general education curriculum. And for all of our students that are matriculating toward getting a diploma, the law is pretty clear that we're supposed to provide them with a program that's going to enable them to make progress, but also to meet the standards. So, we get the yin and the yang of it right there. And so let's just think about a little bit deeper about what the substantive requirement means. So our substantive obligation is from our assessments. If we have good, solid assessments. So I think when I think about principals and I think about you being an overseer. Okay, I think about you being a person that needs to be able to read that evaluation, read those assessments, and be able to make sense of those assessments so that we can write appropriate present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, or present levels is what we call them in Kentucky. And so when I look at the substantive obligation required, our legal requirement is that we have appropriate assessments, good sound assessments that we can take information from, and we can write a present level. Now, what's a present level? A present level is going to be the current level of functioning for that student, academically and functionally, behaviorally. Okay. Behavioral and function kind of go together, but we sometimes separate those out because sometimes we have functional behavior, which might be things like functional communication, daily living, and socialization. But then we also have maladaptive behavior, and sometimes that gets thrown into the process as well. And we have to do some, functional behavioral assessments. We have to do behavior intervention plans, and that's what happened with Andrew. They had not done a functional behavioral assessment. They just put a behavior intervention plan together. And Andrew was then, his parents said, "Hey, he's not making progress. They're giving us the same old goals year after year after year." Andrew's getting, he's getting more difficult to deal with for lack of a better way of saying it. He's growing. He's adult size now. He's almost in the 5th grade. Okay, he's going between 4th and 5th grade, and they say, "Hey, we're going to take him to this place called the Firefly Autism House." And when they took him over to the Firefly Autism House, they said, "Hey, first thing we got to do is we got to do a functional behavioral assessment. We've got to look and see what the function of those behaviors are." Usually behaviors, and if you want to put it in a box, behaviors. And I'm not a behavior specialist, but I've learned enough about it from hanging out with Doug that uh, typically behaviors have 2 functions: either to avoid something or to get something, right? And so when we do a functional behavioral assessment, then we can plan a program. And so they first did a functional behavioral assessment. They said, "Hey, why is he trying to elope the class?" Well, he was fixated on a timer. He was trying to get to a timer. He was trying to get some attention. He was trying to get something, right? He was wanting to get to the timer that he had gotten fixated on previously. And then, they went on. They said, "Well, why Why is he? Why does he have all this anxiety? What are some of his fears? So he had the fear of going to the bathroom. He could not use the public restroom. They had to figure that out. You have to take care of those pieces before you can educate, right? And so the school system in Colorado had failed to address those. They were essentially babysitting him, okay, within the four walls of that school or the four walls of that room. And so this thing got all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, hey, merely uh, just hovering above a bit of progress is no education at all. We're not providing him any education at all. So Andrew, the standard that came back said we got to have we got to have these things. We got to have measurable annual goals. We have to have research-based programming, and we have to monitor the progress. So when you're thinking about that as a principal, you're thinking, okay, can I look at an assessment? Can I make sense of some of that assessment information? Can I help my teachers understand that they have to write a baseline from that? We have to have a starting point in that present level. We have to know what the current level of function is. And then when we think about goals, we want to think about what their unique circumstances are. And then we also have to think about what the adverse effect of the disability is in them in the general curriculum. And so when we think about those things, these are the pieces that, and I've got that statement down there, the IEP must be internally consistent. We've got to have all these pieces working together. Okay. We've got to set a baseline. It's got to be based on data, and it's got to be a baseline that we can come with a specific behavior that we're going to try to modify, whether it be reading and answering questions, whether it be calculating mathematics problems, or whether it be reducing some type of maladaptive behavior. We have to be able to measure those things. And when we look at those academic pieces, clearly we're going to say, can we look at what the student's doing and measure it? If there's not measurement going on within those IEPs, and those IEP goals are written poorly, that they can't be measured, then we don't have any legal ground to support ourselves, to say that we provided the faith. And so that's super, super important as we think about it and move through this whole talk here. So here's the IEP guidance document. Okay, is Kentucky meeting the procedural piece of this with their guidance? I think they are, because this is basically what the IEP guidance document says an IEP should contain: a present level. It also has special factors, and we've had some talk about that as well, and particularly in the last little bit, when you're looking at an IEP, if you've got a student that you choose to have that student receive a calculator on the state exam, on the Kentucky Summative Assessment, that's a special factor under assistive technology, and you have to address that. But in the present level, you have to have raised a need. You have to have evaluation data that shows that student is going to need that to make progress in the general curriculum. See how that all works together? That makes the internal consistency fly, right? Then we may have a goal over there that addresses that student's deficits in mathematics around calculation. And then we're going to have some short-term, so we're going to have some goals on that. We're going to have some short-term objectives that kind of scaffold or are foundational to that overall calculation goal. And so we would look back in the standards and we'd look for those foundation pieces, and we would develop short-term objectives that go back to that present level and that work toward that, increasing that baseline and reaching that goal. And then we have specially designed instruction. Remember, one of the substantive requirements was that we have peer-reviewed, research-based strategies that we're using in our specially designed instruction. And then in our supplementary aids and services, we're saying, okay, what other things does the student need to make progress? That's what goes in the IEP, right? And then when we look at the least restrictive environment, we're saying, where can we best provide this in the student's least restrictive environment? The definition of least restrictive environment is that the student be educated with his non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. And we know that co-teaching is an attempt to do that. But we can't just go into those co-teaching settings and provide accommodations. We have to provide real instruction around the goals, and we have to show that we're making progress on those goals. That's why the IEP is written. The student needs specially designed instruction, they need goals, and they need advancement in these deficit areas, or they wouldn't have an IEP, right? And so, if we're just going to do co-teaching for the outcome of providing accommodations, then we got a whole school full of 504 students. We don't have any students that need IEPs. So we got to make sure as principals that we're monitoring that, okay, that we know what goes in the IEP, and that, and then we're looking at progress monitoring. Now, we know that Andrew got to the Supreme Court because there was no progress monitoring. If our goals are not measurable, we can't have measurable goals. We can't have progress. We can't show progress on the things that we have decided that these students need to work on. And so whatever their disability needs are, we have to address, and we have to have measurable goals to do that. Okay, procedurally, we got to check boxes, right? We got to make sure that we, just kind of summarize what we talked about here for the last little bit. We got to check box. We got to make sure that the ARC notices are sent out properly. We got to make sure that there's a 7-day notice, that the right people are invited. The purpose of the IEP, or the purpose of the meeting, is fulfilled in the conference summary, that we get all the documentation to the parent. Those are procedural things. And then within that substance piece, and then we also said the components of the IEP have to be in place. That's procedural. But then when we get into that, in order to provide substance, we have to have not just components, but measurable components. And we have to have components that are internally consistent, that work together. And so that's really what we're talking about when we say, are we providing FAPE? Are we giving students what they need when they need it? Equitable services. Are we planning, and are we monitoring these programs? Are we writing goals that are measurable? And super important that we consider that. So the big picture here, okay, the big picture is down here at the bottom. We have to have assessments, and those assessments are for eligibility, but they're also for instruction. Okay, so yes, we need to know what the student's IQ score is. Yes, we need to know how they work with within the academic realm. We need to know how they work within the functional realm. When you think about academics, you're thinking about things like the Wyatt. That's an achievement test. Okay, you can't progress monitor the achievement test. That's more summative in nature. Okay, and then you have functional behavioral pieces in there. Executive functioning. You have the Vineland that speaks to functional communication, functional daily living, functional socialization. And so that's the first part of it. So getting that assessment right, understanding that assessment, making sure that we set a baseline is the point of the present level. We have strength data, we have need data, we have all those things, but we have to have, we have to make sure that we have a behavior that is measurable, okay? And we have to have a tool that we can measure it with. And we have to have some criteria. And we have to have what Barbara Bateman calls givens, okay? Given a sentence starter and 3 minutes to write, the student will write this many correct word sequences. That's what we're talking about, okay? And then within the programming piece, the big picture is that we have measurable goals. And when we have those goals, we provide services that attack those goals and address those goals. And then we monitor progress. We have formative evaluation, and we have reporting requirements. Now, as principals, we need to be looking at those progress reports as they go home. They need to have data in them. They need to say where the student was when the 9 weeks started. That's the baseline. They need to say what strategies we used. Did we make any changes to those strategies? Because there's a concept in special education that says if we know or should have known that the student's not making progress, we make a change, right? That's why we do formative assessment. Anita Archer says it needs to be moment-to-moment assessment. Formative assessment. It's not a test. It's a check for understanding, ongoing within the instruction. And so when we do formative evaluation, that helps us to make decisions educationally and instructionally, but it also helps us with our reporting requirements. And so we need to have our teachers need to be reporting on progress to parents as often as we send report cards home. And there needs to be some real substance. We've talked a lot about substantive pieces. There needs to be real substance, real data, real numbers that show, is the student making progress? Is the student making real, meaningful progress in light of their unique circumstances? And is it ambitious? Have we set ambitious goals for that student to achieve that? So that's super, super important. But that's the big picture. For procedures, that's the big, and it gets into the substance piece. So when we look at a present level, it's based on full and individualized assessment. The IEP determines the student's unique educational needs, both academic and functional, and it explains the effects of the student's disability on the learning and involvement in the general education curriculum. So statements like, when you bring a general education teacher into the ARC meeting, they're supposed to tell you what a typical matriculating student looks like in that class. A student that's doing good work within the standards. Okay. Now we compare that level of our student with a disability to that typical advancing peer, and we say, this is how far away this student is from that. And what we're going to write, or we're going to write goals to move that student closer. We're trying to close that gap. We're trying to close that achievement or that functional behavioral gap within the IEP. The IEP is layered on top of the general curriculum. The IEP is a tool. It's not intended to be the entire program, but it is holistic in nature. When you go in and you look at an IEP, it's your responsibility to know what's in that IEP. As a principal, you are the chairperson. You are the person that is responsible. If we go to a court of law, they're going to say, principal, where are you? ARC chairperson, where are you? Can you talk to me? Can you give a cogent response as to how you're providing a FAPE? So getting back to what we were talking about, let's look a little bit at what's required in a present level. So if you're the principal and you're reading the present level, we need to see these pieces. Okay, we need to identify the student need. We need to know the effect that their disability and those deficits have on their participation within the general education classroom. We need to know what the baseline is. We need a percentage. We need a number. We need something we can count. And it needs to be on a discrete scale, not something broad, but something discrete, something specific. And it needs to be connected to a goal, a service, or both. Okay. So when you write that present level, you got to think, is there a skill there that we're going to work on? Is there a baseline percentage that is our starting point? And then can we reasonably calculate an IEP goal, an ambitious goal in light of the student's unique circumstances? We need to think about how much progress do we think he can make in a year? Because if the goal is written correctly, it's going to be time bound. It's going to have the expectation is this is how much progress the student can make in a year on this particular service if we give him these strategies and we work on it. So that's the internal consistency that we're talking about. And then, a few years ago, we had a national presenter present for us statewide here in Kentucky, and she used SMART goals. And quite honestly, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to confuse people so much. And this is going to, because we use 6 components, we use the A, B, C, D, E, F method. But then when I got to thinking about it and got to really studying a little deeper about goals, they both work hand in hand. This is almost like the federal piece, okay? And the state of Kentucky requires a little more to reach it, okay? If you think about the way the law works, the federal piece says Goals have to be specific. Goals have to be measurable. Goals have to be ambitious, but they have to be reasonable. Okay. We can say ambitious. Now, there was a court case uh, just a few years ago in South Carolina where uh, they wrote this child was in the ninth grade. The student was in the ninth grade, and she was reading on third grade level. And they said the goal was that she was going to make 3 months of progress on the WJ3, which is the Woodcock Johnson Achievement Test. Okay. Now, is that ambitious? Hardly, right? Was it reasonable? Well, you have to look at how much progress she'd made in the past. You have to look at her disability category, and you have to think about what can we reasonably expect her to uh, be able to do. And then that time bound piece in Kentucky, we just imply that it's going to be a year that we're going to work on a goal. And so when we think about IEP goals, that's what we're talking about. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. That SMART goals are part of Kentucky's goals. Okay, they have to be all of these things in order to be um, providing what we need to be providing. If we can't measure the goal, if it doesn't have some measure of ambition, if we can't say this is where the student is currently functioning, and we're going to try to push them ahead based on what's reasonable, that's what we're trying to do with an IEP goal. And so you need to be able to look at goals and say, are they appropriate? Do they have a method of measurement that's going to measure the verb that we've put in those goals? And so why should goals be specific? Goals must address the academic and functional needs in the PLAF, okay, in the present levels. Goals provide a mechanism for determining if a student is making progress. And this is the evidence that we have to say that we've implemented. We've provided the FAPE. We've met the letter of the law when it comes to the substantive piece of idea. It's really about progress. And that's the change from Rally, which was saying, if the kids make them advance from grade to grade, that's enough progress. That's enough benefit from the IEP. It was merely de minimis. It was just above progress. Okay, just hovering, just saying we got a little bit of progress, we're good. Okay, if we adjust the goals a little bit and we change the criteria a little bit, that's good. Well, we know that that's not reality because we have students that have much more significant needs. And so when we got to the injury bit, it was like, okay, now we're going from merely de minimis to reasonably enabling the student to make progress. So the standard now for substance is, can we show that we've made progress? And that's what everything hinges on and what we do in special education with an IEP. And so as a principal, we need to be able to look at a goal and say, hey, is it showing that the student's making progress? So here's another court case. The student's annual goals and objectives in the IEP simply do not contain objective criteria which permit measurement of students' progress. A goal of increasing reading comprehension skills or improving decoding skills is not a measurable goal. Okay? Even if the present levels of performance were clearly stated, an open-ended statement that says we're going to improve something doesn't tell us how much and to what degree. And we can't say it's reasonably calculated. Okay, improve is not measurable. Increase is not measurable. So when you see goals that have improve and increase in them, hey, point it back to the teacher and say, hey, we got to have some data in here. We got to have measurable verbs. We got to have something that we can see, something that's visible. So we can see it, we can count it, we can hear it, we can time it. Things like reading and answering questions, calculating, okay, writing sentences, writing paragraphs. Those are things that are measurable. Responding to a prompt, that's measurable. How long does it take you to respond to a prompt? How long does the student take to start working once you've given a prompt? Those are measurable pieces. Okay, and so that's really what we're talking about when we talk about this. So here's the things to remember with the target behavior. Is it observable? Is it measurable? Is it verifiable? Is it repeatable? Can it be counted frequently? And it's to write, to read. Okay, not visible, not open to many interpretations, to understand, to enjoy, to improve, to develop. So you can see the difference there. So as principals and monitoring IEPs and monitoring whether or not we're providing FAPE, we need to make sure that our goals are measurable and that they're linked back to the present level statements. So let's look at this goal for a second. Given a third grade reading passage, Mickey will fluently read the passage at 78 words per minute over 4 consecutive trials as measured by weekly oral reading fluency probes. Now, um, let's hold off on that second. Just keep that in mind for a second. This is Kentucky's approach to writing a measurable annual goal. Is it smart? Yes, it's smart. Okay, it meets all the elements of smart. We'll start with the behavior. Okay, what observable action will the student perform? The audience, the A is the student's name. Okay, and the way we write IEPs in Kentucky, the givens that Barbara Bateman talked about in her book, that was some really good work a few years ago. What are the conditions under which the action is performed? What are we going to give the kid? What scaffold are we going to provide that kid? Are we going to give them a tool? Are we going to give them a graphic organizer? Are we going to give them a sentence starter? Are we going to give them an oral reading fluency passage? What are we going to give them? And under what conditions are we going to measure the behavior? And then how well must the student perform the skill? That's the objective piece of it, right? That's the measurable piece. We've got numbers in the baseline, in the present level. We got numbers in the goal. They have to connect, okay? And then what tool will we use to measure the student progress? Now, the state of Kentucky does IEP progress monitoring. They've made it simple. You can only put 3 types of data in Infinite Campus Goal Monitoring. 3 types. Those end up in one, percentages, okay? They're going to end up in a percentage. That's like a frequency count. Or, you're going to read and answer questions. You're going to come up with a percentage on how many you get correct. Those are percentages. And then you're going to have duration. That's a behavior that you're going to record how long a behavior lasts. And then you got the third piece is the latency type of tool, where you're going to measure how long it takes a student to respond to a prompt. Those are the only 3 kind of data that can go in. And, if you want to really write a strong measurable goal, curriculum-based measures are the way to go. When it comes to academics, you're going to provide academic or curriculum-based measures. And then how often will you take data? So you can see the A, B, C, D, E, F approach here in Kentucky. And does it meet the SMART? Requirement? Yes, it meets the SMART requirement. It's specific. We're going to have a specific behavior. It's measurable. We're going to have a degree. We're going to have a behavior that we can see, count, hear, a time. We're going to have a tool that measures it, so it's going to be measurable. Is it ambitious? Well, that is where the hard part comes in. Sometimes we have to look at the student and what's expected in light of their unique circumstances, and we have to say, I'll give you an example. If a student's reading, you're doing a reading passage with a student, and you notice that at the third grade level, you give the student a third grade reading passage, you give it 4 or 5 times, and the student can get 90% of the questions correct. Okay, that's their independent reading level. We're going to want to go to the 4th grade and probe them and see how they do on the 4th grade reading level. Okay, so that takes a little time, it takes a little planning, it takes a little action, and we're going to say, okay, if that 4th grade reading level comes back at 20 or 30%, well, that's likely their baseline. That's likely where our starting point needs to be. And how much then can we expect them to advance? Well, we look back to the 3rd grade or that previous grade, and we see how much progress did they make in a year? And we reasonably calculate it. This is what we can expect. This is how much progress we can expect. So it's a little bit of a diagnostic game that you play, and so then that reasonably calculated fits right in here. And so then we set that degree criterion as that reasonable calculation piece. And then, is it time bound? Yes. Implied in Kentucky, yes, it's time bound. How often are we going to take data? We're going to take it weekly. We're going to report on it every 9 weeks. And then we're going to look at an annual review analysis in a year. Okay. So the goal is implied. It's an annual goal. Okay. So we don't have to even put that time piece in there to meet what Kentucky wants for a measurable annual goal. So let's go back to our a little bit of practice here. What do you think? Does this one have all the components? Put it in the chat. Take a minute, look at this. Given a reading passage within his 4th grade independent reading level, Mickey will fluently read the passage at 125 words per minute over 4 consecutive trials as measured by bi-weekly data tracking and teacher observations. I want to know what you think. I want to know if it may have all the components, but is it truly measurable? That's what I want you to think. And that's what I want you to write in the chat, if you could possibly do that for me. Let's take just a minute here. This is a bit of a culminating project here. When we think about measurability, substance, providing faith, meeting the letter of idea. You see anything wrong with it? I think there's significant things wrong with this. Dr. Bates, you see anything wrong with this? Not to put you on the spot.
I do, Mr. May.
What do you see wrong with this?
Well, I'm still left to wonder as far as the tracking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know what how I understand it's bi-weekly, but I'm missing some information.
Is bi-weekly vague? Is bi-weekly vague?
It's a little bit vague.
Yeah, so we wouldn't use that.
And then I'm saying also I'm tracking, but I'm going to use some kind of bi-weekly data, which is vague, but I'm also going to use a teacher observation. So I'm a little bit uncertain of how I'm collecting the data. So that's one question I might have.
Yeah, I think it's the method of measurement piece is really messed up. I appreciate that. What else do you guys see? Somebody else chime in here. Sylvia, you see anything wrong with it?
Fluency at 125 words per minute, are we measuring how well he reads, or are we measuring if he is able to decode? Like what exactly?
It's ambiguous, isn't it? That's exactly right. And would you, if you're going to make a goal, remember that A part of the SMART goal, and remember the language in Andrew. It says ambitious, right? If we're only going to work on his independent reading level, then what's the point, right? Look at that circumstance. Given a reading passage within his 4th grade independent reading level, we need him to be, he's in the 6th, so we should at least be working on the 5th grade here, right? If he's on independence, he's getting 90% of the words that are expected of him to be read. If you give him not adults word list, but if you give him a word list based on the 4th grade, he's getting 90% of that. That's his independent level. And so this one's a little bit screwed up. And I did it intentionally because sometimes a non-example, thank you, Anita Archer, is the best way to teach, right? When you see all the mistakes, right? And like I said, it's safe space. Bi-weekly, we a long time ago we threw that out in Kentucky. We said we want it to either say 2 times a month or 2 times a week, right? I think it's important that we have when we do progress monitoring, we do it more than once a month, because the trend data that we get from that's not going to be enough for us to report on progress in a 9-week period. There's not going to be enough verifiable data there to say that if the student's making progress or not. And then, data tracking and teacher observations. We want curriculum-based measures. When we're talking about reading, we want the word probes in there. You have a drop-down box. So it should be curriculum-based probe here. Should be the way to go. Anytime I get the word consecutive, I worry about it because we have attendance issues in Kentucky, both with our teaching staff and our students. And so getting someone in this situation where we can do this 4 consecutive times may be difficult. What does the IEP team expect the student to learn? That's a question, okay? And when you're talking about the role of the principal, what goals are needed that allow the child to participate and make progress in the general curriculum? What are the deficits based on the disability? What does the goals reflect? Does it reflect all the needs from the disability? Are the goals measurable? And do they reflect the IEP guidance document? Those are all good questions you need to be asking yourselves. And you need to be, working with your teachers because a lot of your teachers are young, all right, and they need support, and they need you to pour into them, and make it important that they understand these pieces. As assistant principals, as we're monitoring, as ARC chairpersons, as we're monitoring, the good news is you've got time. The bad news is, if you go to a court of law, you're going to be the person that's on the witness stand, probably more than likely. And that's not to scare you up, but that's just the truth of the matter. And so we really need to know what's in an IEP, what goes in an IEP, and how we can support our teachers to develop these pieces. And so, one of the best ways is to equip yourself with knowledge and to be able to share that and to be able to model that for your teachers and pour into them, from a, you know, from an intellectual standpoint, you need to be pouring into them and inspiring them to figure out how to do this correctly. An IEP doesn't have to be difficult; it just has to be measurable. Okay, a lot of times we'll get IEPs when we review IEPs. Brenda Combs and I will look at an IEP and it'll have tons of information in it, but it doesn't say anything. It doesn't get to the measurability piece. It doesn't address where the student's currently functioning. It doesn't talk about how it's impacting the general ed progress and how it looks, how a student looks when compared to general education peers. And so the measurability standard is the one that we have to get to. It's progress. That's what we know from Andrew. This is straight out of the IEP guidance document, measurable annual goals. To kind of reinforce what we talked about. Anticipated results in 1 year. There's your time bound. Specific goals or specific skills. I'm sorry. The purpose is to promote access, to promote learning of skills, and to advance mastery and understanding of content. Hey, they're appropriately ambitious, related to the disability, linked to the present levels. They bridge the gap between where the student's currently functioning and where they're expected to meet the standard at the grade level that they're in. Okay. Skills and strategies. Can it pass the stranger test? If someone picks it up, can they make sense of it? Can they determine where the student's currently functioning and how we're going to attack that? And is it internally consistent? Here's what it's not. It's not copied and pasted standards. It's not the same goals from year to year to year to year to year, right? When you do an annual review analysis and you're sitting in that meeting and you're chairing that meeting, you've got to get to that purpose, right? You got to make sure you discuss progress. How many goals did we master? How many of the goals do we need to tweak? How many of the goals do we need to change? What instructional strategies did we use? That's the purpose of an annual review. What are we going to use next? What can we reasonably expect the student to do next year? Do we know what his baseline is right now? Those are all questions that you have to ask yourself in order for it to be meaningful and to meet the letter of the law. Super, super important that as principals, we lead this work. Because what we see right now, to be quite honest, the elephant in the room is we see kids getting accommodations in lots of places. And we see little pockets of good teaching going on, intentional to the goals. Specially designed instruction is supposed to be special education teachers teaching intentional to the goals. And so you should be monitoring that in your schools. Are they teaching? Whether they're in a co-taught setting or not. And these students, they need more, okay? Now, is there some precedent for this legally? This is what I was talking about with specially designed instruction. Is it special? Does it address the child's unique needs? Is it related to an IEP goal? Is it instruction rather than a tool or accommodation? Is it intentional and designed to bring about independence? Does it grow a transferable or generalizable skill? Those are the things that you need to be thinking about when you're talking about that. But here's what I wanted to get to. When we look at this slide right here, SDI is explicit instruction in the use of a graphic organizer. Okay. Supplementary aids and services is giving a student a graphic organizer, and I've repeated this many, many times, but I don't know a better example to compare the two. When you're looking at some of the components of the IEP, the supplementary aids and services are things that the student needs to make progress. So don't, as the chairperson, don't allow them to put a bunch of stuff on there, a bunch of laundry list kinds of things that you're never going to get to. It's only the things that that are intended to bring progress on those goals that you've set. And so when you say, well, I give a kid a graphic organizer, okay, that's a tool that's going to help him with the writing process. Maybe it's going to help him with some other process. But does he really understand the purpose of a graphic organizer? Does he really understand how to build his own graphic organizer? And when you get into that, you're talking about specially designed instruction. So I wanted to just kind of throw that in here. The difference between specially designed instruction is what the special ed teacher does that's special to the goals. We teach them to build their own graphic organizer. They can take that everywhere. It's generalizable to every place. And then the goal is to comprehend what's being read. Okay. So you see the difference between all those three pieces, right? You see the difference. When we set goals, we want to know, can the student make some progress on a skill? And the how-to is the specially designed instruction that we're going to provide. Is it peer reviewed? Does it have a research base to it? And then if we're going to put it as a supplementary aid and service that's going to address some of those goals, is it meant to bring progress on the goals? And that's all it should be. And so we need to teach our folks that as well.
Mr. May, can I ask a question? Or
sure.
Go back to that slide.
Go back to that.
Let's think about that for in the perspective for the school leader.
Okay.
And talking about how the thing that you were talking about earlier about the goal and the objective, and that's the compliance. That's the right. We have this procedural. These are we establish goals for students. But here is where those two things merge about education benefit, outcomes, the resources and supports. So this is where those two things merge as far as the paperwork and the teaching. And this is where it all connects. And here's where we can have a huge impact if we can think about that goal then is specific to a deficit for that child. And that goal is, again, what you were talking about, what that child can be able to do, what we reasonably calculated for a year out based on what? And that's where we have to think about that. We're moving them as close as we can to that grade level standard. Right? So when we think about assessment, accountability, all of those pieces, and we have gaps, here is where we have the most leverage is around our instruction, the supplementary aids and services that we provide for kids, and how we're monitoring that progress connected back to that individualized education program. So I think just making that connection, here's where we can really, what's the word you use all the time? Have a big impact, right? Raise the needle, right? That's where we can raise the needle when we're thinking about that and helping teachers understand that the instruction and the supports that they need are to move them toward that grade level standard. So it's really all connected.
And you know, Dr. Bates, I really appreciate your perspective on that, because that's exactly hitting to it. And you said it much better than I ever could in terms of, you know, if we're just doing the middle piece, if we're just giving them things, okay, and the end game is to say, okay, we give them all these things. Are we disabling them further, okay, so that they can do well on a summative assessment? Okay, and we know that those things are important. Okay, we know that we don't want to be TSI, status, but at the same time, if we can not let go of the rope of instruction, and we can think, okay, the process, fall in love with the process, teach kids to read better, and the residual effect when you apply the tools, they got the tools and they got the instruction together. That's the best case scenario, because that's what's going to bring about real measurable progress for a student. And I'm going to show you a court case in here, if I can get to it as we get ready to finish up here, because I think this really, really is eye-opening. And this thing is recent, okay? William A. versus Clarksville Montgomery County School System in the Sixth Circuit. William A. is a student with dyslexia, graduated from high school with a 3.4 GPA, but could not read. I just want you to think about that for a second. I want you to consider that for a second. From his middle school years onward, his IEP focused on reading fluency and included supports in speech and assistive technology, but there was little to no progress in his foundational reading skills. This one gets good, guys, I'm telling you. If you don't get anything from me today, listen to this, okay? In the 11th grade, after a formal evaluation confirmed dyslexia, his parents arranged private tutoring that did produce progress in basic reading skills. So he could do it, we just didn't do it for him, okay? The school refused to incorporate that specific or equivalent intervention into his IEP. Who's running this school system? That's what I want to know. The Sixth Circuit, which is the one that we're in Kentucky, emphasized that while assistive tech and accommodations are important, they cannot substitute for direct systematic instruction in foundational reading skills, decoding, encoding, syllable recognition. When the student is not progressing, do we continue to do the same thing over and over and just give them tools? David Bateman says it's new or should have known. KVEC, K-O-S-H-K, right? KVEC, K-O-S-H-K. Knew or should have known that the student was not making progress and we failed to do anything, okay? Very, very dramatic, right? Because it's super, super sad, in my opinion. The administrative law judge found the school had violated Williams' right to a free, appropriate public education and ordered 888 hours of compensatory dyslexia tutoring at a big price tag for the district. Now, that was because, per the terms of his IEP, he relied on a host of accommodations that mask his inability to read. To write a paper, for example, the ALJ, or administrative law judge, described William would first dictate his topic into a speech-to-text software. He then would paste the written words into an AI software like ChatGPT. And then the AI software would generate a paper on that topic, which William would then paste back into his own document. Finally, I skipped ahead. Finally, William would run the paper through Grammarly, so it reflected an appropriate writing style. Man, they were giving him all kinds of tools, but they were not teaching him much, really, okay? The accommodations are good, don't get me wrong, but they're not good if you do that only in the absence of good, strong instruction. And so the takeaway is accommodations do not equal remediation. Simply providing accommodations doesn't fulfill IDEA when the student needs foundational instruction and isn't making progress. Now, I know all the problems. I've heard all the problems. We don't have time to do this. We don't have time to do that. How do we do this in co-teaching? We have to figure it out, folks. We have to figure it out. We have to work toward being able to provide these students with real improvement in these skills that they have deficits in. And as you see, in this court case, in the Sixth Circuit where Kentucky operates, this is the standard. It's more. It's progress monitoring. It's more benefit. It's reasonably calculated. It's ambitious. And it's teaching and providing specially designed instruction that has a peer-reviewed base to it that really makes the difference. Here's other takeaways. Grades and graduation do not shield from liability. Okay, think about Rally. As long as she was making grade-to-grade matriculation, everything was okay, right? Even if a student has a good GPA and advances grade to grade, that does not automatically mean the education was appropriate under IDEA. Fundamental skill deficits matter. So we have to address the fundamental skill deficits with the program. So putting it all together, the internal consistency of the IEP, the present levels have to say where the student's currently functioning. The annual goals have to be measurable. We have to be able to measure it. We have to write goals that are measurable. We have a statement of special education and supplementary aids and services that assist us in moving in the general education curriculum. We talk about participation outside the regular education and statewide district assessments. And that's not the point of school. The point of school is for students to learn, okay? And we can't let go of the rope. And then we look at the date, the frequency, the duration, and location of services. and it all includes specially designed instruction. And going back to what specially designed instruction is, does it address the child's unique needs? This is what a special ed teacher is supposed to be doing. Is it related to an IEP goal? It's instruction. It's what we do special. Okay. Are we collecting data for progress monitoring? Is it instruction rather than a tool? Is it intentional, designed to bring about progress? Is it growing a skill that is transferable? And is it building independence? I'll leave you with that today. Thank you very much.